I've held this in for so long, too long. Every day, every night, it's been clawing at my mind, like a shadow creeping through the cracks, whispering, warning. I told myself to forget, to move on. But some things won't stay buried. You think you know him, the man they talk about on the news, the legend, the mogul, the untouchable king of the industry. That's not who I met. That's not the man I shared a cell with. The man I met? He wasn't a celebrity. He wasn't powerful. He wasn't even human. He was something else. And he was hiding something. I could see it in his eyes from the moment they threw him in that cell with me. The way he moved. The way he watched. I've been locked up long enough to know when a man is scared. I've seen it 100 times before. But this was different. He wasn't scared of the guards. He wasn't scared of the other inmates. No, Diddy was scared of something else. Something bigger. At first, I didn't ask. I kept my distance. You don't last in here by sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. But it was impossible to ignore the way he would wake up in the middle of the night, breathing heavy, whispering to himself, like he was waiting for something, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. Then, one night, he spoke to me. You ever hear about the tunnels? That's what he said. Just like that. Out of nowhere. His voice was low, careful, like he wasn't sure if he should even be saying it out loud. I laughed at first. Thought he was messing with me. What tunnels? I asked. He looked at me, really looked at me, like he was trying to decide if he could trust me. And then he leaned in, whispering so low I could barely hear him. They run underneath this place. They've been here longer than the prison itself, older than the walls, older than anything. I told him he was crazy, but he just shook his head. I've seen them, he said. I didn't believe him. Not at first. But then things started happening. Things I couldn't explain. Things that made me wish I had never asked. And that was just the beginning. I should have let it go. Should have shut my mouth and moved on. But something about the way he said it, the tunnels, stuck with me. It wasn't just a story to him. It was real. For the next few days, Diddy barely spoke. He spent most of his time sitting in the corner of the cell, staring at the floor like he was somewhere else, like he was waiting. Then, one night, when the prison was dead silent, he spoke again. They think they're gone, he whispered. The ones that disappeared. They think no one will ever find them. I turned to him. Who? His eyes lifted to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them that shook me to my core. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was something deeper, something darker. The kids, he said. My stomach turned. What kids? I asked. But deep down, I already knew what he meant. I'd heard the stories, the missing kids, the ones that vanished without a trace, the ones the media stopped talking about after a while. They're here, he said, tapping the floor with his finger. Below us, in the tunnels. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. That's not possible. He smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was something else. Something wrong. Everything you think you know about this place, he said, it's a lie. I wanted to call him crazy. I wanted to tell him to shut the hell up. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. I'm the only one who knows where they are, he whispered. I'm the only one who knows how to get in. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. His words kept running through my head, over and over. If he was lying, why did he look so certain? If it was just a story, why did it feel so real? And the worst part? Somewhere, deep inside, I knew he was telling the truth. And that was just the beginning. I didn't know what to believe anymore. The tunnels, the missing kids, the way Diddy spoke, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. It haunted me. But then, something happened. Something that changed everything. It was just another day in prison. Cold, lifeless, routine. Diddy kept to himself like always, barely speaking, lost in his own head. But then I saw them, 3 guys from B Block, watching him, whispering, waiting for the right moment. And when it came, they struck. I heard the first hit before I saw it. The sickening crack of a fist against bone. Diddy barely had time to react before they were on him, kicking, punching, driving him into the concrete. Blood splattered across the floor. He didn't fight back. Not once. They wanted to humiliate him, to send a message. And when the guards finally pulled them off, Diddy just lay there, staring at the ceiling, a twisted smile on his face. That's when I knew something wasn't right. For hours, he didn't move, didn't talk. But when night came and the prison fell silent, he turned to me. "They think they've won," he whispered, his lips still split, his eyes blackened. "They think they can touch me." He exhaled slowly, almost laughing to himself. "They don't know who I am." I could feel it. Something shifting in the air, something cold and wrong. "I'm not going to lay a hand on them," he said. "Not one. I don't need to." I swallowed hard. "Then what are you going to do?" His head tilted, and that same eerie smile crept onto his face. "I have something they don't," he whispered. "I have leverage." I didn't understand at first. And then I saw it. The way his fingers tapped against the floor. The tunnels. My stomach turned. "Diddy, what are you saying?" He leaned in closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "They hurt me," he said. "So now I hurt them, and I know exactly where to start." And that's when I realized he wasn't just talking about revenge. He was talking about the kids. He was going to make them pay. Not with his fists, not with his own blood, but by hurting the ones buried beneath us. And there was nothing I could do to stop him. I should have left it alone, should have shut my ears, shut my mind, and pretended none of this was real. But the way Diddy looked at me that night, like he wanted me to know, like he needed me to know, I couldn't walk away. He wanted to talk, and I made the mistake of listening. He sat there on the edge of his bunk, his fingers tapping the rhythm of some silent song against his knee. His busted lip had stopped bleeding, but dried blood still clung to his face. "They don't know," he whispered. "They have no idea what I've done, what I used to do." I didn't respond. I just stared, waiting. He smirked. "You want to know how I hurt them?" I shook my head. "No." But he told me anyway. "It's a process," he said. "You gotta be patient with it. You don't just snatch a kid and throw him in a room. That's amateur shit. You gotta break them. And it starts with fear." I felt my hands clench into fists. "The tunnels," he continued, his voice low, steady, almost proud. "They ain't just a place to hide 'em. They're a tool. See, when you put a kid down there, no light, no sound, no sense of time, they start to lose themselves. First, they cry. Then, they beg. And then they go quiet." I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. "You ever heard a kid scream?" Diddy asked, tilting his head slightly. "Not just any scream. A real scream. A scream that don't sound human no more?" I swallowed hard. "They all start the same," he went on. "They fight. They scratch. But after a few days, after a few weeks, they stop fighting. They stop trying. That's when you own them. I felt sick. I wanted to believe this was some twisted lie, some sick game he was playing with me. But the way he spoke, the details, the precision, this wasn't something he made up. This was something he lived. What did you do to them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Diddy's smile widened. I did what needed to be done, he said. I tested them. I pushed them. Some made it through. Some didn't. I felt my stomach churn. And the ones who didn't? He shrugged. They became part of the tunnels. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, backing away. You're sick, I spat. You're fucking sick. But he just chuckled, leaning back against the cold prison wall. You wanted to know, he said. Now you do. I turned away, but his voice followed me. And the best part? He whispered. I froze. They're still down there? I didn't sleep that night. Because for the first time since I got locked up, I realized something. Diddy wasn't afraid of this place. He belonged here. And the worst part? There was more. Much more. And I was about to hear every last detail. I stopped talking to him after that night. I didn't sit with him at meals. I didn't acknowledge him in the yard. I didn't even glance in his direction when we were locked in our cell. But none of it mattered, because no matter how much distance I put between us, I couldn't escape him. Not really. His words had already planted themselves inside my head, like parasites crawling through my brain, whispering to me even when he wasn't there. I would close my eyes, and I could hear them, the echoes of the tunnels, the cries of the ones who never got out, the way Diddy's voice had carried that twisted, eerie calm, like he was telling me a bedtime story, not a nightmare worse than death. I should have reported him. I should have gone straight to the guards and told them everything. But what could I say? That the man they locked up for fraud, for money laundering, for things they could prove, was actually hiding something much darker? They'd laugh in my face. Or worse, they'd believe me. And if they believed me, that meant it was all real. Every single thing he said. I wasn't ready for that. So, I tried to ignore it. But the nights were the worst. Sleep didn't come easy. It never had in prison. But now, it was impossible. I'd lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. Every sound made me jump. Every footstep in the hallway sent my pulse racing. And the nightmares. God, the nightmares. I saw things I shouldn't have, things I never wanted to see. Children, trapped in the dark, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. The tunnels stretched for miles, twisting and turning like a maze built to keep them lost forever. And somewhere in the distance, Diddy stood, watching, smiling. I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, gripping my sheets like they were the only thing keeping me from falling into the abyss. And every time I opened my eyes, he was awake, sitting there in his bunk, watching me, like he knew, like he was waiting for me to break. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of that cell. I had to get away from him before I lost my mind completely. So the next morning, I went to the warden. I told him I didn't feel safe, that I needed a transfer. I didn't say why. I just said I couldn't be in that cell anymore. He laughed. You think this is a hotel? You don't get to choose your roommate. I begged. I pleaded. Nothing worked. So that night, I lay back down in my bunk, knowing I was trapped, knowing that Diddy's voice wasn't done with me yet. And I was right, because the next night, when the prison went dark, he leaned over and whispered, You can try to run from the truth, but once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. And he was right, because no matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to shut it out, the truth was inside me now, and it wasn't letting go. My time in this place was almost over. Day by day, the end of my sentence crept closer, and for the first time in years, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, the real tunnel, not the ones that haunted my mind every night. I should have felt relief, should have been excited to finally get out, to start fresh, to put all of this behind me. But the truth was, I couldn't, because I knew too much now. Because once you hear something like this, once you know something like this, there's no going back. Diddy had fed me too many details, dropped too many pieces of a puzzle I wished I had never started solving. And no matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't pretend he was just telling stories, because deep down, I knew he wasn't lying. And if he wasn't lying, then that meant there were people out there, people still trapped, still suffering, still waiting for someone, anyone, to come for them. I wasn't a good man. I had made mistakes, done things I wasn't proud of. That's what landed me in here in the first place. But maybe this was my chance. Maybe this was the thing that could make it all mean something. Maybe this was how I made things right. I had no idea where the tunnels were. He had never given me an exact location, but he had given me enough. I knew the kind of places he had talked about. I knew the connections he had before he landed in here. I knew the names he had whispered under his breath, the people who had helped him keep his secrets buried. I didn't have much, but I had that. And when I got out, I was going to use it. I didn't care if people believed me or not. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy, if they laughed in my face the same way the warden had when I begged to be moved. Because I knew, and I wasn't going to be silent. Diddy had spent years thinking he was untouchable, that no one would ever uncover the truth, that no one would ever care enough to dig deep enough. But he was wrong, because now I was out, and I would find the truth. I would make the world listen, and no matter what it took, I would make sure justice was served. This isn't over. Not yet. Not even close.